Claire Montgomery never imagined betrayal could cut this deep. Fired. Pregnant. Abandoned by the man she thought would protect her forever. Not just any man, Alexander Steele, her billionaire CEO ex. He had everything: money, power, influence, and in his arrogance, he believed he could erase her from his life with the stroke of a pen. To him, she was disposable. Replaceable. Forgotten. But what Alexander never knew is that the woman he cast aside would rise again, stronger than he could ever dream. In the silence of her darkest nights, when the tears refused to stop and the world seemed determined to break her, Claire made a vow. She would never be weak again. She would rebuild her life, piece by piece, with nothing but her determination and her will to survive. While Alexander enjoyed the luxury of his empire, Claire endured the pain of loneliness. While he made headlines as one of the most powerful men in the world, she buried herself in study, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. And while he thought her story was over, she was quietly writing a new beginning. Years passed. The world forgot the scandal, but Claire never forgot the pain. She was no longer the naive girl who once stood in Alexander's shadow. She had transformed into someone else, someone brilliant, disciplined, unstoppable. She became a doctor. A healer of hearts. A cardiologist whose skill was unmatched, whose name commanded respect. Every life she saved was proof that she was no longer broken. Every patient who walked away alive was a reminder that her purpose was bigger than her past. And yet, fate has a way of circling back. Because one day, the very man who once shattered her walked into her world again, not as the untouchable billionaire, but as a patient. Helpless. Vulnerable. Alexander Steele, his wealth, his power, his arrogance, none of it could protect him now. His heart, the very core of his existence, was failing. And the only person who could save him was Claire Montgomery, the woman he betrayed. Think about that. The same man who had fired her while pregnant, who left her with nothing, who thought she would never rise again, now lay on a hospital bed, his life hanging by a thread, his fate resting entirely in her hands. The irony was almost poetic. The girl he tried to destroy had become the only one capable of saving him. But this story is not just about medicine. It is about power. About revenge. About love twisted into something sharp and dangerous. Because as Claire stood by his bedside, staring at Alexander Steele, the man who had once taken everything from her, she knew one truth: she could choose whether he lived, or whether he died. And in that moment, she held more power than all his billions combined. Yet power is never simple. Hatred burns hot, but the ashes of love have a way of clinging to the heart. Claire told herself she hated Alexander, that he deserved nothing but pain. And yet, deep inside, a quiet voice asked, "Could you really let him die? Could she ignore the years they shared, the love they once knew, the child they never had a chance to raise? Could she truly sever the last thread that tied her to the man she once loved more than life itself?" And if this moment already has you hooked, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it. Because the deeper we go, the more twists, heartbreaks, and breathtaking moments await. This is where the battle begins, not in the boardroom, not in the courtroom, but in the quiet corridors of the human heart. Because when betrayal collides with memory, when anger collides with desire, when justice collides with forgiveness, what choice will Claire Montgomery make? She was fired while pregnant by Alexander Steele, her billionaire ex. But now, as his cardiologist, she controls his fate. And as the story unfolds, you will witness every twist, every secret, every revelation that will leave you questioning where love ends and revenge begins. This is not just Claire's story. It is a story about the cruelty of power, the strength of resilience, and the fragile line between hate and love. And once you step inside, you will not be able to look away. Because every heartbeat, every decision, every stolen glance between them, is a countdown to a truth that will shatter everything you thought you knew. Stay with me. Because what you are about to experience is more than a story, it is a storm of passion, betrayal, and redemption. And I promise you this, once you begin, you won't be able to stop listening. She never imagined betrayal could cut this deep. Claire Montgomery, a name that once belonged to a girl filled with dreams, hope, and love. She was brilliant, ambitious, and deeply in love with a man who seemed to hold the world in his hands, Alexander Steele. The billionaire CEO whose name echoed through boardrooms, splashed across business magazines, and whispered in hushed admiration among the elite. To everyone else, he was untouchable. But to Claire, he was more than just a powerful figure, he was her protector, her partner, her future. At least, that's what she believed. But love, as she would come to learn, is often blind. For months, she had felt the changes in him, the distance, the coldness in his eyes, the way his phone calls grew shorter, his late nights at the office becoming more frequent. Yet Claire convinced herself it was stress, the burden of running an empire. She told herself he still loved her, that the man she had given her heart to would never abandon her. And then, the truth revealed itself, not in whispers or private confessions, but in the cruelest stage of all, a boardroom. The day began like any other. Claire dressed carefully, smoothing her skirt with nervous excitement. She had just discovered she was pregnant. The news had shaken her, but in a beautiful way. She imagined telling Alexander, seeing his face soften for the first time in weeks, watching pride and joy replace the shadows that haunted his eyes. She carried that secret with trembling hands, hoping today would be the beginning of a new chapter for them both. But when she entered the towering steel and glass headquarters of Steele Enterprises, she felt something shift. The glances from the staff seemed sharper, colder. Whispers trailed behind her heels. She walked into the boardroom with her heart fluttering, only to find Alexander seated at the head of the table, surrounded by his executives, his expression carved from stone. Claire Montgomery, his voice was steady, emotionless, echoing against the walls, "Your position here is terminated. Effective immediately." Her heart stopped. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. Surely, this was some cruel mistake. Surely, the man she loved, the man who had once traced her face with gentle hands and whispered promises in the dark, could not be the same man now stripping her of everything. "Alex," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What are you saying?" He didn't look at her. He didn't blink. With a flick of his hand, he signed a document, slid it across the table, and said, "You've served your purpose. But it's over." The words cut deeper than any blade. Gasps filled the room. Executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one dared to speak. To them, this was business. To Claire, it was the end of her world. She clutched her stomach, the secret of her pregnancy pressing against her like a cruel reminder. He didn't know. He hadn't even asked. He simply erased her, as though she were nothing. Disposable. Replaceable. Forgotten. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. Gathering the last of her strength, she stood. Her voice trembled, but her words carried fire. You may think you've destroyed me, Alexander Steele. But one day, you'll remember this moment. One day, you'll need me. And when that day comes, I won't be the one begging. For a split second, his eyes flickered, something cold, something buried. But then he turned away, dismissing her as though she were a shadow. And just like that, the woman who once believed in love, in loyalty, in forever, was cast out into the storm. Claire walked out of that building with nothing. No job. No love. No support. Just the weight of a child growing inside her, and the crushing realization that the man she trusted most had abandoned her at her weakest. That night, she cried until her body shook. She cried for the life she had lost, for the child she carried, for the betrayal that carved through her soul. But in the silence of those tears, a vow began to form. She would not be broken forever. She would not let Alexander Steele be the author of her story. And though she didn't know it yet, this vow, this fire, would change everything. Because while he enjoyed the luxury of his empire, she would endure the pain of loneliness. While he stood on magazine covers, she would bury herself in sleepless nights and endless study. And while he thought her story was over, Claire Montgomery was quietly writing a new beginning. But what happens when the man who destroyed her becomes the man whose very life depends on her? Claire Montgomery left Steele Enterprises with her head high, but the moment the doors closed behind her, the weight of reality came crashing down. She was alone. The world outside the glittering towers did not care about broken hearts or shattered promises. The city buzzed with life, cars honking, people rushing, neon lights flickering, but to Claire, everything felt muted, drowned out by the echo of Alexander Steele's words, "You've served your purpose. It's over." That night, she returned to her small apartment, collapsing onto the floor with her back pressed against the door as if the world itself were trying to break in. She clutched her stomach, her secret, her child, and whispered through trembling lips, "Don't worry, little one. I'll protect you. Even if I have nothing left. I'll protect you." But protecting life is never easy when you're barely holding on to your own. The weeks that followed were a blur of unanswered calls, eviction notices, and cold stares from neighbors who had once admired her for dating the city's most powerful man. Now, they whispered about her downfall, delighting in the scandal of a woman who had flown too close to the sun, only to have her wings burned by its heat. Claire searched for work, but doors slammed in her face. No one wanted to hire the ex-girlfriend of Alexander Steele. His shadow loomed too large, his influence too deep. Every "no" was not just rejection, it was a reminder that even outside the boardroom, Alexander still controlled her fate. Her body grew weaker as the months dragged on. Pregnancy demanded more than she had to give. Nights were cold, meals skipped, tears uncounted. And then, one night, as rain lashed against her window, pain ripped through her body. She clutched her belly, panic flooding her chest. Alone, afraid, she staggered to the hospital. Hours felt like years as doctors worked to save both mother and child. But fate can be cruel. When dawn finally broke, Claire lay in silence, the hospital room filled with a stillness so heavy it crushed her. Her child, the only piece of love she had left, was gone. Her heart shattered in ways words could never describe. She pressed her face into the thin hospital pillow, her body racked with sobs that seemed to come from a place deeper than her soul. She had lost everything: her job, her love, her child, her future. In that moment, Claire Montgomery ceased to be the woman she once was. But sometimes, rock bottom is where strength is born. Days later, she stood at the window of her hospital room, pale, exhausted, but with fire in her eyes. She whispered a vow into the morning light: "I will never be weak again. Never." And so, she began again. Claire enrolled in night classes, working odd jobs by day, her body fueled by coffee and raw determination. She studied until her eyes blurred, forcing herself to keep going when exhaustion begged her to stop. Her grief became her fuel, her pain her discipline. While Alexander Steele made headlines with new investments, new women, and new luxuries, Claire buried herself in textbooks. While he sat in penthouses overlooking the city skyline, she sat in dimly lit libraries, chasing a future no one believed she could reach. Every exam she passed was a victory. Every hurdle she overcame was proof that she was not finished. Slowly, painfully, she was carving a new identity, not as the woman abandoned by a billionaire, but as someone stronger, sharper, and unbreakable. The world had tried to erase her. Alexander had tried to forget her. But Claire Montgomery refused to vanish. Years passed. The scandal faded, her name forgotten by society. But Claire had not forgotten. She carried her pain like armor, her vow like a sword. And with each passing year, the girl who once cried herself to sleep transformed into a woman who could command respect. She was becoming someone Alexander Steele could never have imagined. But fate has a way of circling back. Because while Alexander believed she was erased, Claire was quietly preparing for the day their paths would cross again. And when it came, the man who once shattered her would find himself helpless, vulnerable, and entirely at her mercy. The world had written her off. Claire Montgomery was supposed to disappear, just another forgotten name in the long shadow of Alexander Steele. Fired. Pregnant. Abandoned. And then stripped of the child who could have been her redemption. For most, that would have been the end. But for Claire, it was only the beginning. She left the hospital with nothing but a battered body and a vow etched deep into her soul: never again. Never weak. Never broken. At first, survival was all she knew. Waiting tables, cleaning apartments, stocking shelves at midnight shifts, anything to keep a roof over her head. The city was cruel, but so was life. And yet, with every scraped paycheck, with every sleepless night, Claire clung to something greater than survival. She wanted transformation. One evening, after a 12-hour shift at a diner, she walked past a bookstore. In the window was a book on human anatomy. Something inside her stirred. She stepped inside, running her fingers across the pages. The diagrams of the human heart fascinated her. How fragile it was, and yet, how it carried the weight of life itself. That night, Claire made a decision that would change everything. She would dedicate her life to mastering the very organ that symbolized both her greatest loss and her greatest resilience, the heart. And so, she enrolled in community college. She worked by day, studied by night. Her classmates had families to support them, tutors to guide them, money to shield them. Claire had none of that. What she had was hunger, the kind of hunger that comes from knowing failure is no longer an option. She failed tests. She stumbled. Professors doubted her. But Claire refused to stop. She studied harder, pushed further, sacrificed more. For every "you're not good enough," she answered with another sleepless night, another page of notes, another victory. Years passed, and Claire's name began to mean something different. No longer whispered in gossip, but spoken with respect. "She's brilliant," professors said. "She's relentless. She never gives up." Medical school accepted her. Then came residency. Long hours, surgeries, mistakes, and triumphs. Claire Montgomery became a woman forged in fire, unshakable, unstoppable. Cardiology called to her like destiny. Each beat of a heart under her care was a reminder. She had once been broken, but now she was a healer of hearts. The irony was almost poetic. The girl who had lost everything was now the one giving life back to others. And Claire did not simply succeed, she excelled. She became known for her precision, her empathy, her brilliance under pressure. Patients trusted her. Colleagues respected her. She had built a life entirely her own, one Alexander Steele could never touch. Yet even in her triumphs, the shadows of the past never fully disappeared. There were nights when she stood alone in her apartment, looking at the city skyline, wondering if he ever thought of her. Wondering if Alexander Steele, the man who had once shattered her, even remembered her name. Perhaps he didn't. But fate did. Because fate has a way of circling back. And while Claire Montgomery was saving lives, while she was earning a reputation as one of the finest cardiologists in the country, Alexander Steele's perfect world was beginning to crack. His wealth, his empire, his power, it could buy him everything. Everything, except the one thing that was failing inside him. His heart. And so the stage was set. The man who once destroyed her was about to return. Not as the untouchable billionaire, but as a broken patient. Helpless. Vulnerable. His life hanging by a thread. And the only person who could save him was Claire Montgomery. Hospitals are strange places. They hold life and death within the same walls, hope and despair walking side by side. For Claire Montgomery, they had always been her sanctuary. A place where she was in control, where her skill was unmatched, where the past could never touch her. Or so she thought. The day began like any other. The morning rounds. Charts to review. Patients to monitor. But then came the call. "Dr. Montgomery, there's a new VIP admission. He's in critical condition." The hospital director wants you to take the case personally. Claire didn't think much of it at first. VIP patients came and went. Usually wealthy, powerful men who thought money could buy them more time on Earth. She accepted the file without looking. But the moment her eyes landed on the name, her world stopped. Alexander Steele. The letters burned into her vision. The air in the room seemed to vanish. For years, she had buried that name under layers of work, success, and sheer willpower. And yet, here it was, dragged back into her life like a haunting ghost. Her hands trembled as she opened the file. Cardiac failure. Complications. Surgery required. Urgent. If he didn't receive expert care soon, Alexander Steele, the man who had once stood above the world, would lose the one thing he couldn't control, his heart. Claire closed the folder and took a deep breath. She could have refused. She could have walked away, asked another surgeon to take the case. But something inside her stopped her. Fate had placed him on her table, and she wasn't going to look away. Not this time. She walked down the sterile white hallway toward his private room. Each step echoed with memories. His voice. His betrayal. His coldness. The night he threw her out, pregnant and broken. The night her life collapsed. And now, here he was. She opened the door. The man on the hospital bed was barely recognizable. Alexander Steele, once the embodiment of power and arrogance, now looked small, almost fragile. His skin was pale. His chest rose and fell with difficulty. The monitors beeped steadily beside him, reminding Claire of just how close he was to the edge. His eyes opened slowly, and when they met hers, silence filled the room. A silence heavy with years of unspoken words, with pain, with betrayal. Claire. His voice cracked, rough and weak. Is it really you? She didn't answer right away. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained calm, professional. She was no longer the girl he had abandoned. She was Dr. Claire Montgomery, respected, powerful, in control. Yes, she finally said, her tone steady. I'll be your cardiologist. Alexander swallowed, his pride struggling to survive even in his weakness. Of all people, it had to be you. Claire stepped closer, her gaze cold, steady, unwavering. Yes. It had to be me. Because life has a strange sense of justice, doesn't it? He tried to smirk, but the effort left him coughing, clutching his chest. For the first time, he wasn't the billionaire CEO towering over her. He wasn't the man who held her future in his hands. He was just a patient. Vulnerable. Mortal. And utterly dependent on her. Inside, Claire felt a storm raging. Part of her wanted to walk away, to let him feel the weight of every tear she had shed, every sleepless night, every loss he had caused. But another part of her, the part that had risen from pain into strength, knew this was her moment. Not for revenge, but for power. She leaned in slightly, her voice low, sharp as a scalpel. You once decided my fate, Alexander. You took everything from me. But now, your life is in my hands. And the question is, what will I do with it? The beeping of the heart monitor quickened, mirroring the tension in the room. Alexander stared at her, a flicker of fear breaking through his usual arrogance. For the first time, he wasn't in control. And Claire knew, this was only the beginning. A woman standing in her power. And a battle not just of hearts, but of destiny. The following morning, Alexander Steele woke to the sterile smell of disinfectant and the relentless beeping of machines. His body ached, every breath felt heavier than the last, and for the first time in his life, he hated the sound of silence. Because silence meant weakness. Silence meant waiting. And Alexander Steele was a man who never waited. But this time, he had no choice. He turned his head, expecting to see another faceless nurse, another assistant eager to please. Instead, he saw her. Claire Montgomery. Standing at the foot of his bed, clipboard in hand, dressed in her white coat like an armored queen. For a moment, Alexander wondered if he was still dreaming. Surely life wasn't cruel enough to bring her back into his world, not like this. But the truth was undeniable. The woman he had once discarded was now the woman holding his life together. "Good morning, Mr. Steele," Claire said, her voice clipped, professional, devoid of warmth. He flinched at the formality. "Mr. Steele." Once upon a time, she'd whispered his first name with love. Now it was as though she was speaking to a stranger. "You're my doctor." His voice was weak, but there was still a trace of the arrogance he carried like a crown. "Yes," Claire replied without hesitation. "And the only one who can perform the surgery that might save your life." The weight of her words sank deep into his chest, heavier than his failing heart. Alexander had spent his entire life in control, of boardrooms, of empires, of people. He was the man who gave orders, not the man who received them. But here, now, with tubes in his arms and monitors tracking every fragile beat of his heart, he realized the terrifying truth: he was no longer in control. And worse, Claire was. He tried to sit up, to reassert his authority, but the pain tore through him, forcing him back against the pillows. Claire didn't move to help him. She simply watched, her eyes cool, steady, unreadable. Still stubborn, she murmured. "Some things never change." He glared at her, but there was no strength behind it. "I don't need your commentary. Just do your job." Her lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Oh, I will. But understand this, Alexander, I'm not the naive woman you once knew. In this room, in this hospital, I make the decisions. Not you." The statement hit him harder than any business defeat he had ever known. Because she was right. His billions couldn't save him. His power, his reputation, his empire, all of it was useless here. His fate rested entirely in the hands of the woman he had once fired, abandoned, broken. And she knew it. Claire leaned closer, her voice low, laced with both steel and sorrow. "You had the power to destroy me once. But now, I hold the power to end you, or to save you. How does it feel, Alexander, knowing your life depends on the woman you tried to erase?" For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Not fear of death. No, Alexander Steele had never feared death. But fear of her. Fear of the truth. Fear of the possibility that she might choose revenge over mercy. He tried to summon his pride. "You won't let me die," he said, though his voice cracked with uncertainty. "It's not who you are." Claire straightened, her expression unreadable. "Maybe not. But you don't know me anymore. The woman you left behind is gone." The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. And for the first time, Alexander realized he was standing at the mercy of a woman he had once underestimated. It was a new kind of battlefield. Not a boardroom with deals and contracts. Not a war fought with money or influence. This was war of the heart, literal and figurative. And Claire held every weapon. As she turned to leave the room, her heels clicking against the polished floor, Alexander called after her. His voice was desperate, raw, stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. "Claire," he paused, searching for words he had never been forced to say before. Words like sorry. Words like forgive me. But his pride chained them to his tongue. All he managed was a whisper. "Don't walk away." She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The power had shifted, and they both knew it. And so the game had changed. The man who once thought he owned the world now lay powerless, while the woman he cast aside rose higher than he could ever imagine. But power is a dangerous thing. And when the past collides with the present, the battle for control has only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of tests, charts, and hushed conversations in hospital corridors. To the outside world, Alexander Steele remained the billionaire everyone admired, or envied. But behind closed doors, he was reduced to something he had never been before: fragile. Mortal. And every time his eyes opened, the first thing he saw was her. Dr. Claire Montgomery. The woman who had once loved him more than life itself. The woman he had cast aside when she needed him most. The woman who now held his future in her steady hands. Every checkup, every exam, every procedure carried an undercurrent of tension that neither could ignore. Claire was careful, professional, and precise, but beneath the surface, emotions stirred like a storm threatening to break. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the hospital windows gold, Alexander finally spoke words that had been clawing at his throat. "Why?" Claire didn't look up from the chart she was reviewing. "Why what? Why did you stay in the room yesterday? Why do you care at all? After everything I did to you, why are you even here?" The question hung heavy in the sterile air. Claire lowered the chart, her eyes locking onto his. And in that gaze, Alexander felt the weight of every year, every scar, every sleepless night that had forged her into the woman she was now. "You think this is about you?" she asked, her voice trembling with both strength and pain. "You think my life, my choices, my career, all of it revolved around you?" "No, Alexander. I became a doctor because I refused to let your betrayal define me. Every life I saved was proof that you couldn't break me. Not then. Not now." Her words cut deeper than any scalpel. Because he could hear the truth in them, truth that made him realize just how small he had become in her story. But Alexander Steele was not a man accustomed to being small. "I hurt you," he admitted, his voice cracking with a rare vulnerability. "More than I ever should have. But I can't stop thinking about what we lost. About the child, about us. Claire's hand froze in midair. Her breath caught. For a brief, unguarded moment, the mask of the doctor slipped, and the woman he once knew flickered before him. The child. The wound she had carried in silence. The pain she had buried beneath years of discipline and work. And now, hearing him say it, it was like ripping the bandage from a scar that never fully healed. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, her voice sharp as glass. You don't get to say that. You don't get to grieve what you abandoned. You fired me, Alexander. Pregnant. Alone. Do you know what it was like to sit in that tiny apartment with nothing but fear and shame for company? Do you know what it was like to bury a child without the father even knowing? No. You don't. And you never will. Her words shattered the silence like thunder. Alexander's chest heaved, not just from illness but from the crushing weight of regret. He wanted to reach for her, to take her hand, to beg for forgiveness, but the fore in his arm and the weakness in his body reminded him of the truth. He was powerless. And maybe, just maybe, this was the punishment he deserved. But then, something unexpected happened. Claire's hand, trembling, reluctant, brushed against his wrist as she adjusted his fore. It was brief, almost accidental. But for Alexander, it was everything. Because in that fleeting touch, he felt not just her anger, but the echo of something deeper. Something she couldn't quite extinguish. Love. Or perhaps the ghost of it. And that scared him more than dying. Claire, he whispered, his voice hoarse, I don't deserve your mercy. But I'm begging you, don't hate me forever. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time since their worlds collided again, she let her guard slip. Just enough for him to see the battle raging inside her. Hatred burned hot, but love never truly died. She pulled her hand away, her expression hardening again. Rest, Mr. Steele. You'll need your strength for the surgery. But as she turned to leave, Alexander caught the faintest shimmer of tears in her eyes. Proof that the past was not buried as deep as she wanted it to be. And in that moment, both of them realized the same haunting truth. Old wounds may scar, but they never truly heal. But scars have a way of shaping us, of twisting us into something we never expected. And as the surgery approaches, the line between hatred and forgiveness will blur, pulling them into a storm they can't escape. The day had come. The corridors of St. Mark's Hospital were quiet, but inside the operating room, the air pulsed with a tension that could be cut with a scalpel. Bright lights flooded the space, casting everything in sharp clarity, the gleam of instruments, the steady hum of machines, the masked faces of nurses waiting for orders. And at the center of it all stood Dr. Claire Montgomery. Her hands were steady, gloved, and ready. Her eyes, focused and unyielding, burned with both the discipline of a doctor and the fire of a woman standing face to face with fate. On the table before her lay Alexander Steele. Billionaire. CEO. The man who once believed himself untouchable. Now stripped of everything, he was nothing more than a patient, his chest rising and falling under the anesthesia, his life balanced on the razor's edge. Claire drew a breath, steady but heavy with memory. This was the moment. The moment where her oath as a doctor collided with her past as a woman scorned. She had sworn to heal. But she had also sworn, years ago in the shadows of her pain, never to forgive him. And now, she held his heart in her hands. "Scalpel," she said, her voice sharp and precise. The nurse placed the instrument in her hand, and with the first incision, the room fell into silence, except for the rhythmic beep of the monitor, counting down every second of Alexander's fragile life. Inside her, a storm raged. Every cut, every stitch, every movement brought flashes of the past. His face the day he fired her. The coldness in his voice. The way the door closed behind her as her life crumbled. The nights she cried alone. The child she lost. And yet, also the laughter they once shared. The warmth of his arms. The whispered promises of forever. Her hands moved with flawless precision, but her mind was at war. Heart exposed, she whispered. The team responded in silence, their trust placed entirely in her. And there it was. His heart. Beating weakly. Failing. The same heart that once betrayed her, now utterly dependent on her mercy. Claire froze for the briefest second. To everyone else in the room, it was just a pause, a breath. But to her, it was a moment of unbearable choice. Here it was. The power she had dreamed of. With one wrong move, one hesitation, she could end him. Justice. Revenge. Closure. The man who destroyed her would finally pay the ultimate price. But then, another memory surfaced. Her vow. The night she sat alone, whispering through tears, "I will never be weak again. I will rebuild. I will heal. Not just others. Not just herself. But even those who didn't deserve it." She was not like him. She was not cruel, careless, or arrogant. She was a doctor. A healer. And healers save lives, even the lives of those who once broke them. "Bypass complete," she murmured, her voice firm now, resolute. The surgery pressed forward. Hours passed like seconds. The team followed her every instruction, her hands steady even as her heart trembled. Sweat dripped beneath her mask, but her focus never wavered. Finally, the moment came. "Restarting the heart," she announced. The paddles were applied. The team held its breath. Beep, silence. Another shock. Beep, beep, beep. The rhythm returned. Stronger. Steady. Alive. A collective exhale filled the room, but Claire didn't smile. Not yet. She simply nodded, removing her gloves with calm precision. "It's done," she said. Alexander Steele would live. Not because he deserved it. Not because she forgave him. But because she chose to rise above him. But deep inside, as she walked out of the operating room, something gnawed at her. Because saving his life hadn't closed the chapter. It had only opened a new one. For what happens when the man who owes you his very heartbeat looks at you not with power, but with gratitude? What happens when the man you hate begins to need you in ways neither of you could have predicted? And what happens when the heart you saved begins to fight for you all over again? The surgery was over, but the real battle was just beginning. Because you can save a heart with medicine, but who can save it from love? The surgery was over. The battle to keep Alexander Steele alive had been won. But the war between the past and the present was only just beginning. In the quiet of his recovery room, Alexander lay propped against crisp white pillows, the steady beep of the heart monitor echoing like a reminder of the life he almost lost, and the hands that saved him. Claire's hands. Every beat, every breath, belonged to her now. When Claire entered, she carried herself with the poise of a doctor, but her eyes betrayed her. Because no matter how hard she tried to bury it, every time she looked at him, memories clawed their way to the surface. He looked different now. Not the untouchable billionaire commanding boardrooms, not the man who once cut her out of his life with cold precision. Here, stripped of power, humbled by pain, he looked human. And that terrified her more than anything. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice clipped, professional. Alexander studied her for a moment before answering. "Alive. Thanks to you." She gave a curt nod. "The surgery was successful, but recovery will be long. You'll need discipline, patience, and—" "You," he interrupted softly. Her breath caught. The word hung between them like forbidden fruit. "Mr. Steele," she began, her tone firm, "this is a doctor-patient relationship. Nothing more." But Alexander shook his head, his voice low, steady, carrying a weight that pierced through her armor. "Claire, we both know that's not true. You didn't just save me because you're a doctor. You saved me because somewhere, deep inside, you still care." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Care? Don't flatter yourself. I saved you because it's my job. Because I took an oath. Don't mistake duty for desire." And yet, even as the words left her lips, her heart betrayed her. Because in the silence that followed, she felt it, that dangerous pull, that magnetic force that had once drawn her to him and still whispered to her now. He leaned forward, grimacing slightly but never breaking her gaze. "You can lie to yourself, Claire. But not to me. I see it in your eyes every time you walk into this room. You hate me, but you don't just hate me. You remember. The nights. The laughter. The fire between us." Her pulse quickened. She hated that he could still read her. Hated that he still had the power to awaken something she had spent years trying to bury. "You think words will undo the past?" she snapped. "You think reminding me of what we had makes me forget what you did? You fired me while I was carrying your child, Alexander. You left me to face the world alone. Desire doesn't erase betrayal. Attraction doesn't erase pain." Silence fell. Heavy. Suffocating. And then, in the quiet, his voice broke. Softer. Honest. Raw. "I know. And I'll regret it until the day I die. But Claire, that day almost came. And all I could think about was you. Not my empire. Not my money. Just you." Her throat tightened. She wanted to dismiss him, to walk away and never look back. But the words burrowed deep, awakening wounds that had never healed and desires that had never died. For a moment, she saw not the billionaire, not the betrayer, but the man she had once loved. The man who had held her close and promised forever. And that terrified her. She turned sharply, her coat swishing behind her as she headed for the door. "Rest, Mr. Steele. That's the only thing you should focus on." But just before she left, his voice stopped her cold. "Claire." She froze. "My heart may be stitched back together, but only you can heal it." Her breath hitched, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't. Because if she did, he would see it, the tear threatening to fall, the weakness she swore she'd never show again. She walked out, leaving him alone with his words. But in the hallway, with her back pressed against the cold wall, her chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. Because she knew the truth she didn't dare admit. The more she tried to resist him, the more her heart betrayed her. And so begins the most dangerous battle of all, not in the hospital, not in the boardroom, but in the hidden places of the heart. Because what happens when healing turns into longing? And what happens when desire threatens to burn away the walls she built to protect herself? The days after surgery passed in a blur of medication, physical therapy, and restless nights. Alexander Steele was alive, but he was far from at peace. Because every time the door to his room opened, he hoped to see Claire. And every time she walked away, his heart ached in ways no scalpel could mend. But the ghosts of their past weren't content to remain buried. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, a sharp knock echoed at his door. Alexander expected a nurse, maybe Claire on her rounds. But when the door opened, his breath caught. Standing there was a woman from his past. Elegant. Cold. Unyielding. It was Veronica Kane, his former fiancée. The woman he had chosen over Claire. "Alexander," she said smoothly, her heels clicking against the tile as she approached. "You look fragile." "Not a word I thought I'd ever use for you." Alexander's jaw tightened. "What are you doing here, Veronica?" She smiled, but her eyes gleamed with something darker. "Word travels fast in our circles. A Steele clinging to life on an operating table? It's headline-worthy. But what intrigued me most was who saved you." She leaned closer, her voice dripping with venom. "Claire Reynolds. The woman you discarded. The one you humiliated. Tell me, Alexander, how does it feel knowing your life depends on the very heart you once broke?" His fists clenched. "Leave her out of this." But Veronica laughed softly, shaking her head. "Oh, Alexander. She's not out of this. She never was. You may not see it, but the world is watching." The mighty Steele brought low, his fate tied to a woman he once destroyed. "Do you know what that does to your empire? To your reputation?" He glared at her. "I don't care about my reputation anymore. Not when I've faced death. Not when Claire." He stopped himself, realizing too late the vulnerability in his voice. Her smile sharpened. "Ah. So it's true. You still love her." The silence that followed was answer enough. But Claire, standing just outside the door with a chart in hand, heard every word. Her chest tightened as Veronica's words sliced through the air like poisoned blades. She wanted to walk away, to pretend she hadn't heard. But something kept her rooted to the spot. Veronica's tone turned colder. "You think she'll forgive you, Alexander?" That she'll forget the way you destroyed her? You have no idea what she endured after you cast her aside." Alexander's voice softened, regret dripping from every syllable. "I know what I did. And I'll never forgive myself. But if she ever lets me back into her life, I'll spend every breath proving I've changed." Claire's eyes burned with tears, though she quickly wiped them away before stepping into the room. Her presence froze them both. "Dr. Reynolds," Veronica purred, her lips curling in a mocking smile. "How fitting. The angel of mercy herself." Claire ignored her, focusing only on Alexander. "Mr. Steele, it's time for your medication." But as she adjusted his Veronica's voice cut through the room. "Tell me, Claire, what does it feel like? To hold the life of the man who destroyed yours in your hands? To know you could let him die, and no one would blame you?" The question struck deep. Too deep. Because for one terrifying moment, Claire had asked herself the same thing. Her hands trembled, just slightly, but Alexander noticed. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, everything was laid bare: the pain, the anger, the longing, the unspoken words neither dared to say. Veronica smirked, satisfied by the tension. "I'll leave you two to whatever this is. But remember, Alexander, ghosts never stay buried. And some wounds never heal." With that, she swept out, leaving a storm in her wake. For a long moment, the room was silent. Only the steady beep of the heart monitor filled the air. Then Alexander whispered, his voice raw. "Claire, please. Don't listen to her. Don't let her twist the truth. Yes, I broke you. But I swear, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Claire's chest rose and fell, her heart at war with itself. She wanted to hate him. Needed to. But standing there, looking into his eyes, she realized something terrifying. The past wasn't just haunting them. It was alive. And it wasn't done with them yet. Because in the shadows of their history, secrets remain untold. And one truth, about the child, about the night everything fell apart, is about to shatter everything they thought they knew. The hospital corridors were quiet that night, almost unnervingly so. The hum of machines, the distant echo of footsteps, the sterile scent of antiseptic, everything felt sharpened, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Claire stood in the staff lounge, staring at the window's reflection. Not at herself, but at the ghost of the woman she used to be. Pregnant. Alone. Fired by the man who once swore to protect her. She remembered every detail. The look on Alexander's face as he signed the papers. The cold silence that followed. The way her pleas had fallen on deaf ears. She had been discarded like yesterday's news. And yet, she hadn't been alone. Her hand trembled as she pressed it against her abdomen, as though she could still feel the echo of a heartbeat that once lived inside her. A heartbeat that changed everything. A heartbeat Alexander never knew about. The child. Her child. The memory crashed over her like a tidal wave. The pain. The fear. The months she spent in hiding. And the night that would forever divide her life into before and after. She hadn't told Alexander. Not then. Not ever. Because by the time she had gathered the courage to reach out, it was too late. The child had never taken a breath. The grief nearly destroyed her. Alone in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, she had felt the world collapse in on itself. No one knew. No one saw. The tabloids reported on Alexander's flashy engagement to Veronica, while Claire buried her pain in silence. She never forgave him. How could she? And yet, here he was now, lying in a hospital bed of his own, heart failing, life dangling by a thread. It was poetic. Cruel. Beautiful, in the darkest way. But fate wasn't finished. Because Alexander Steele, arrogant, ruthless, untouchable Alexander Steele, was about to learn the truth. The next morning, Alexander woke to find Claire standing by his bedside. She wasn't holding a chart. She wasn't adjusting an 4. She was just watching him. "Claire?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Her lips parted, as though she wanted to speak, but for once, the brilliant, unstoppable Dr. Reynolds seemed unsure. Finally, she whispered, "There's something you never knew. Something I should have told you years ago." Alexander frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "What is it?" Her chest tightened. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't rehearsed the words. But the truth clawed at her, demanding to be spoken. "You didn't just fire me, Alexander. You didn't just break me. When you left me," her voice cracked, "I was pregnant." The world seemed to stop. The steady beeping of the heart monitor grew louder, filling the silence that followed. Alexander's eyes widened, his face draining of color. "Pregnant?" he whispered. Claire nodded, tears brimming. "Yes. And I carried that child alone. Without you. Without anyone." His hand trembled as he reached for hers, but she pulled back, her jaw tightening. "Don't," she said sharply. "You don't get to touch me. You don't get to act like you cared. Because if you had, you would have been there. You would have chosen me. You would have fought for us." Alexander's chest heaved, his voice breaking. "Claire, what happened to the baby?" Her silence was answer enough. The tears spilling down her cheeks told the story words never could. And in that moment, Alexander's world shattered. The empire he had built, the billions he had amassed, the power he thought would shield him, none of it mattered. Because the one thing he could never buy back was gone. Forever. This was not just a revelation. It was a reckoning. The child they never had would become the ghost that haunted them both. For Claire, a symbol of pain and survival. For Alexander, a wound deeper than any scalpel could inflict. And yet, in that raw, unbearable moment, something unexpected stirred between them. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something far more dangerous. A flicker of the love they once shared. Because sometimes, the deepest scars bind two souls tighter than any vow. But secrets never stay buried. And this one, the secret of the child, the lies, the silence, is only the beginning. Because while Claire and Alexander wrestle with the ghosts of what they lost, someone else is watching. Someone who knows the truth. Someone who will use it to destroy them both. The revelation of the lost child had shattered Alexander and Claire in ways neither could put into words. For Alexander, the guilt was suffocating. For Claire, the grief was raw, as though the wound had reopened. But what they didn't know was that someone else had been listening. Not to the words spoken in hushed voices, not to the tears that fell in the quiet of the night, but to the truth itself. And in the wrong hands, truth is the deadliest weapon of all. From the corner office of Steel Enterprises, a woman watched the unfolding drama with cold precision. Veronica Kane. The socialite turned power broker who had once flaunted her engagement ring in front of flashing cameras. To the world, she was Alexander's ex-fiancée, the glamorous queen who nearly became his wife. But Veronica was far more than that. She was a strategist. A predator. A woman who understood that power isn't just taken, it's manipulated, bent, and stolen in silence. And now, she knew Claire's darkest secret. The child. The pregnancy. The scandal that had been buried for years. It was enough to ruin Claire's career. Enough to strip Alexander of what little humanity he had left in the public eye. Enough to destroy them both. And Veronica planned to use it. The first move came quietly. A manila envelope slid beneath Claire's office door. No name. No address. Just a single photograph inside. A grainy hospital record. Dated. Signed. Confirming her pregnancy. Her heart stopped. No one was supposed to know. She had hidden those records, buried them under new identities and sealed files. And yet, here they were, staring back at her, proof that someone had unearthed the past. A note was scrawled in sharp, deliberate ink. Secrets don't stay secrets forever. Pay the price, or the world will know. Claire's hands trembled. For the first time in years, she felt powerless. Vulnerable. The walls she had built around her heart, around her entire existence, were crumbling. Who could have found out? And then it hit her. Veronica. The woman who had always seen Claire as an obstacle. The woman who had once stood on Alexander's arm, dripping in diamonds, smirking at Claire as though she were nothing. The woman who had the money, the reach, and the coldness to dig into sealed hospital files. But why now? Why strike after all these years? Because timing is everything. Meanwhile, Alexander was fighting his own demons. Every night, he replayed Claire's words. The child. The life he never knew. The life he had lost before it even began. It haunted him. It gnawed at him. It broke him in ways money could never fix. But in his weakness, he, too, became a target. An anonymous email hit his inbox. No subject line. Just one attachment. A picture of the same hospital record Claire had received. And beneath it, 6 words that sent a chill through his veins. Your empire dies with this secret. For the first time in his life, Alexander Steele, the billionaire titan, the untouchable CEO, realized he was cornered. Not by competitors. Not by shareholders. But by his own past. And the one person who could drag it all into the light was Veronica Kane. She had always craved power. But now, she wanted more. Not just Alexander's empire. Not just Claire's reputation. She wanted control. And control meant turning their grief into her weapon. That night, Claire and Alexander met in her office. Both holding their envelopes. Both carrying the same dread. When their eyes met, words weren't needed. It started, Claire whispered. Alexander nodded grimly. Veronica. The name hung between them like a curse. Because they both knew, Veronica Kane wasn't the type to bluff. When she played a card, it meant she already had the winning hand. And if she exposed the truth, if the world discovered that Alexander had abandoned a pregnant woman, if they learned that Claire had carried and lost his child alone, the fallout would be catastrophic. For Claire, it would mean scandal, lost patience, destroyed trust. For Alexander, it would mean public ruin, shareholder rebellion, and the collapse of everything he had built. And for both of them, it would mean the past they tried to bury would finally rise, clawing its way into the present. But Veronica wasn't just after destruction. No. She was after something far more sinister. She wanted Claire to make a choice. Save Alexander's life, or lose everything. Because in her next message, Veronica made her demand clear. The billionaire lives, only if the cardiologist sacrifices. What did that mean? What was she planning? Neither of them knew. But one thing was certain, the enemy in the shadows had just stepped into the light. And the battle for power, love, and survival had only just begun. Secrets are power. And Veronica Kane knew it better than anyone. For years, she had played the role of the perfect socialite, the sparkling smile, the flawless dresses, the photographs in glossy magazines. But beneath the diamonds and champagne was something darker. A hunger. And now, she had what she always wanted, leverage. Not just over Claire. Not just over Alexander. But over their very lives. The first strike came in broad daylight. At a prestigious medical gala, one of the biggest nights of the year, where doctors, philanthropists, and billionaires gathered under a sea of crystal chandeliers, Claire was being honored for her groundbreaking work in cardiology. It should have been her night. Her triumph. The proof that she had risen from ashes to greatness. But Veronica had other plans. The lights dimmed. The host approached the podium. Applause thundered as Claire's name was called. She walked gracefully to the stage, her white gown flowing, her head held high. For a moment, the world saw only her brilliance. Until the screens lit up. Not with her achievements. Not with her awards. But with scandal. A photograph of her hospital record. Dated. Marked. The evidence of her hidden pregnancy. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Whispers spread like wildfire. Phones rose in the air, snapping pictures, recording videos, broadcasting the spectacle live across social media. Claire froze, her breath stolen. And then, the words appeared across the screen in bold letters. The mistress. The secret child. The lie. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled. Investors whispered. Doctors shook their heads. Claire's entire reputation, her years of sacrifice, her hard-earned respect, was unraveling in real time. And then Veronica appeared, gliding into the ballroom like she owned it. A crimson dress hugging her figure, a glass of champagne in her hand, a cruel smile curving her lips. "Did you really think," she purred, her voice cutting through the chaos, "that you could bury the truth forever?" The cameras turned to her. The crowd silenced. She had become the star of her own twisted performance. Across the room, Alexander pushed through the crowd, his heart monitor still faintly beeping beneath his suit jacket. He shouldn't have been there, his doctors warned him not to risk the stress, but he had to be. He saw Claire's pale face, her trembling hands, the storm in her eyes. And he saw Veronica, the woman who once stood at his side, now holding his future in her perfectly manicured grip. "Enough," he roared, his voice echoing through the hall. "This ends now, Veronica." But she only laughed. A cold, mocking laugh that silenced even the reporters. "Oh, Alexander," she said sweetly, "you've always thought you could control everything. But tell me," she tilted her head, her smile widening, "how does it feel to finally lose?" Then she revealed her true hand. Veronica didn't just have hospital records. She had proof. Emails. Documents. Witness statements. Every shred of evidence that Claire had carried Alexander's child, and that Alexander had abandoned her. She threatened to release it all to the press. Unless Claire made a choice. Save Alexander's failing company by stepping down from her medical career, publicly declaring herself unfit to continue. Or watch everything, Alexander's empire, her reputation, their lives, burn to the ground. Claire's chest tightened. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every patient who trusted her. Every child who looked at her as proof that resilience was possible. Every life she had saved. And Alexander, his empire may have been built on arrogance, but thousands of jobs depended on it. Entire families. Entire futures. Veronica had them cornered. And she knew it. As the cameras flashed and the crowd waited, Veronica leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have 24 hours, Claire," she said, her smile wicked. "Decide whose life matters more. Yours, or his." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving chaos in her wake. The stage was no longer about love or betrayal. It was about survival. Veronica Kane had made her deadly move. And now, Claire and Alexander had 24 hours to stop their lives from collapsing. But what neither of them knew, was that Veronica's game was only just beginning. Because some enemies don't just want revenge. They want blood. 24 hours. That was all the time they had. Not 24 days. Not 24 weeks. Just 24 hours before Veronica Kane unleashed destruction that would ripple through every corner of their lives. For Claire Montgomery, it meant losing the career she had bled for, the identity she had built from ashes. For Alexander Steele, it meant watching his empire, the company he had built from ambition and arrogance, crumble before his eyes. And for both of them, it meant the truth they had buried would finally rise, hungry and merciless. Claire sat in her office, the city lights glowing outside like fireflies. The manila envelope still lay on her desk, its contents like a curse she couldn't burn. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper as though touching it might make it vanish. But it wouldn't. The past never vanished. Her chest ached. Not just from fear, but from anger. Anger that Veronica had this power. Anger that Alexander had once left her alone to face it all. Anger that the universe had robbed her of a child and then dared to bring him back into her orbit. And yet, there was something more dangerous than anger. Hope. Because part of her still hoped that Alexander would fight for her this time. Across town, Alexander stood in his penthouse office, the city skyline stretching endlessly before him. Once, it had been his kingdom. Every building a reminder of his dominance. Every headline proof of his success. But tonight, the lights mocked him. He saw himself reflected in the glass, not the ruthless CEO, not the billionaire mogul, but a man cornered. A man whose sins were finally clawing their way back. He poured himself a drink, but his hand shook so violently the glass slipped and shattered. And as he stared at the shards, he realized the truth. Money couldn't save him. Power couldn't save him. Only Claire could. The woman he had once destroyed, now held his fate. The hours began to slip away. 20 hours left. Claire buried herself in medical files, as if saving another life might save her own. But the envelope sat there, always staring, always reminding. 18 hours left. Alexander made calls. Lawyers. PR teams. Investors. But no matter how much money he threw, no matter how many threats he issued, one fact remained: Veronica Kane had the evidence. And she would use it. 15 hours left. The press was already circling. Rumors had spread from the gala, whispers of scandal, headlines baiting the public with half-truths. The mistress doctor? The secret heir? Every click, every view, was another nail in their coffin. 12 hours left. Claire couldn't breathe. She walked the hospital halls like a ghost, her mind replaying Veronica's ultimatum. Step down. Sacrifice. Or everything burns. 10 hours left. Alexander showed up at the hospital. Not as the powerful CEO. Not as the arrogant man who once cast her aside. But as a man undone. Claire, he said, his voice breaking. Don't let her win. Don't let her take this from you. Her eyes flared with fury. You don't get to say that. You already took everything once. He winced, but didn't argue. Because she was right. 8 hours left. They sat in silence in her office, the clock ticking between them like a judge. Finally, Claire whispered, "Do you regret it, Alexander? Do you regret firing me? Leaving me? Leaving us?" He swallowed hard. For the first time in his life, he didn't hide behind pride. "Yes," he said, his voice raw. "Every day. And I'd trade every dollar, every company, every headline, just to go back and choose differently." Tears pricked her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Because regret wasn't enough. Not now. 5 hours left. A new email arrived. From Veronica. This time, it wasn't just a threat. It was a preview. Attached was a press release, already formatted, already ready to send to every major news outlet. Breaking: Billionaire CEO abandons pregnant employee, secret scandal exposed. Claire's stomach dropped. Alexander's face went pale. Veronica wasn't bluffing. She was ready. 3 hours left. They had one choice: surrender to Veronica's ultimatum, or fight back. And as the clock ticked closer to midnight, one thing became terrifyingly clear. If they didn't act, Veronica wouldn't just ruin them. She would destroy everything. 2 hours. That was all the time left before Veronica Kane pressed send and detonated her bomb of secrets. For Claire, it meant the end of her career. For Alexander, the collapse of his empire. But together, they realized something critical. Veronica wasn't just playing them. She was underestimating them. And sometimes, the only way to survive a predator is to become one yourself. Claire closed the office blinds, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from adrenaline. For so long she had lived on the defensive. Surviving. Healing others while silently carrying her own wounds. But now, something inside her snapped. She wasn't just a doctor. She wasn't just the woman Alexander once betrayed. She was a survivor. A fighter. And if Veronica Kane wanted war, Claire was ready to give her one. Alexander leaned across the table, his eyes blazing in a way Claire had never seen before. "No more running," he said. "No more silence. If she wants to play dirty, then we'll play smarter." For the first time, he wasn't speaking as the ruthless CEO who once destroyed her life. He was speaking as a man who had nothing left to lose, and everything left to protect. Together, they crafted a plan. Step 1: expose Veronica's weaknesses. Alexander revealed a secret he had kept buried. Veronica Kane wasn't just a socialite. She had her own skeletons. Illegal investments. A failed merger covered up with forged signatures. And whispers of blackmail that reached far beyond Claire. Claire knew the media lived for scandal, but they also lived for redemption. If she spoke first, if she told the story her way, Veronica's power would crumble. It was a gamble. A dangerous, reckless gamble. But if they didn't take it, Veronica would destroy them both. Claire hesitated. What if this ruins us anyway? Alexander leaned closer, his voice steady. Then we fall together. But at least we fight. Their eyes locked. For the first time, the walls between them cracked, not from anger, not from betrayal, but from the fire of shared survival. And in that moment, Claire realized something terrifying. She wasn't just fighting for her career. She was fighting for her heart. 1 hour left. Claire typed furiously, drafting her own statement. Not a victim's story. Not a scandal. But the truth. The story of a woman fired while pregnant. A woman who refused to break. A woman who returned not for revenge, but to prove her strength. 30 minutes left. Alexander's team dug through Veronica's files, every keystroke peeling back another layer of her corruption. 20 minutes left. Veronica's email icon lit up again. Final warning, the subject line read. 10 minutes left. Claire's hands shook as she prepared to hit publish. This was it. The moment everything would change. Alexander placed his hand over hers, steadying her. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "you're not alone this time." Her heart hammered, but she nodded. Because for once, she believed him. Together, they pressed the button. The gamble was made. Seconds later, the world reacted. Phones buzzed. Social media ignited. News outlets scrambled. And somewhere in a penthouse suite across the city, Veronica Kane saw her perfect plan unraveling. Her lips curled into a venomous smile. "Oh, Claire," she whispered. "You really think you can outplay me?" Midnight had passed. Claire and Alexander had made their gamble, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like they had won. The world was listening. Their story was spreading. Headlines painted Claire as the phoenix who had risen from betrayal. Alexander as the fallen king clawing back his redemption. But if they thought Veronica Kane would fall so easily, they were wrong. So very wrong. In her penthouse, Veronica poured herself a glass of wine, the city lights glowing beneath her. Her phone rang non-stop, investors panicking, allies demanding answers. She ignored them all. Instead, she stared at Claire's statement glowing on her laptop screen. And then she laughed. Not the laugh of a woman defeated. The laugh of a predator who had just spotted her prey make a fatal mistake. "You want to play truth, Claire?" Veronica whispered. "Then let's play." She picked up her phone, made a single call. And within minutes, a storm was already forming. At 1 a.m., leaked photos flooded the internet. Claire leaving Alexander's penthouse. Claire looking vulnerable in hospital corridors. Claire's private moments twisted into lies of scandal and impropriety. By 2 a.m., reporters camped outside her building, shouting questions, cameras flashing like lightning. By 3 a.m., Alexander's board of directors demanded answers. Investors threatened to pull out. Stock prices trembled. Veronica had turned the tables. With a few keystrokes, she painted Claire not as a survivor, but as a manipulator. Not as a healer, but as the woman who used her patient for power. Claire watched in horror as her phone lit up with notification after notification. The headlines were brutal. Cardiologist seduces billionaire patient. Pregnancy scandal resurfaces in explosive twist. Is Claire Montgomery the real villain? Her chest tightened. It felt like the same wound reopening, the same betrayal replaying, only this time, magnified 1,000 times over. "Alexander," her voice cracked. "She's destroying me." Alexander slammed his fist against the table. "No. She's trying to destroy us. And I won't let her win." But Claire saw the truth in his eyes. Veronica's strike had rattled him too. Because Veronica didn't just know how to ruin reputations. She knew how to bleed empires. And Alexander Steele's empire was already bleeding. At dawn, Veronica unleashed her deadliest weapon yet. A forged medical report. It claimed Alexander's condition had worsened. That Claire's treatment had been reckless. That she was the reason his heart was failing. Within hours, hospital administrators called for Claire's suspension pending investigation. Within hours, news anchors speculated, did Claire Montgomery risk her ex's life for revenge? And within hours, Claire's entire career, everything she had fought for, balanced on the edge of ruin. In the quiet chaos of her apartment, Claire buried her face in her hands. "Maybe she's right," she whispered. "Maybe I'll never escape this." Alexander knelt beside her, lifting her chin. His voice was fierce, unyielding. "Listen to me. Veronica wins if you believe that. She wins if you give up. But I've seen you fight, Claire. I've seen you survive worse than this. And I swear to you, we are not finished." For the first time, his words didn't sound like arrogance. They sounded like a vow. But even as Alexander spoke, Veronica was already making her final move. A press conference. Scheduled for noon. She would stand before cameras, flawless in her designer dress, and deliver a speech so polished, so poisonous, that by the end of it, Claire would be finished. Not just suspended. Not just shamed. Erased. Veronica's voice would drip with venom masked as concern, her lies sharpened into weapons. And the world, hungry for scandal, would devour every word. As the clock ticked toward noon, Claire and Alexander realized the truth. Their gamble hadn't ended the war. It had only begun it. And now, they weren't just fighting for their reputations. They were fighting for survival. The clock struck 11. 1 hour until Veronica Cain's press conference. 1 hour until the world heard a speech designed to erase Claire Montgomery forever. Alexander paced the room, fury simmering in his eyes. "We can't stop her," he muttered. "She has the media, the investors, the lawyers. By noon, she'll bury us alive." Claire didn't answer. She sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the floor, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. She wasn't defeated, no. Something inside her was shifting. A fire. A decision. She thought about everything Veronica had taken from her. Her career. Her reputation. Her peace. But deeper than all of that, she thought about the night she was fired. Pregnant, abandoned, humiliated. That wound had never healed. And now, Veronica dared to strike again. Claire realized something powerful in that moment. She had been fighting to defend herself. To survive. But survival was not enough anymore. It was time to fight back. "Alexander," she said suddenly, her voice steady. He stopped pacing, turned toward her. "I'm going to her press conference." His eyes widened. "What?" "No. Claire, she'll crucify you on live television. You walk into that lion's den, she'll destroy you." Claire shook her head. "No, Alexander. She's counting on me to stay silent. To hide. That's her power. But if I walk into that room and face her head on." She paused, her eyes burning with resolve. "I take that power back." Alexander grabbed her shoulders. "Claire, listen to me. You're talking about suicide. The cameras, the reporters, the board, Veronica owns them all. You don't stand a chance." But Claire only smiled, faint but fierce. "I don't need to own them. I just need the truth. And for once, Alexander, I'm not afraid to speak it." For a moment, he was silent. And then, for the first time, Alexander Steele saw not the woman he betrayed, not the doctor who healed him, but the warrior who could change everything. Noon. The conference hall pulsed with tension. Reporters packed every corner. Cameras flashed like lightning. On stage, Veronica Kane stood at the podium, radiant, untouchable, her smile sharpened into a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth as silk, "thank you for coming. I stand before you today not as a rival, but as a woman concerned, deeply concerned, about the corruption in medicine, about the abuse of power hidden behind hospital walls." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Veronica was painting Claire as a danger, a disgrace. Her performance was flawless. Her lies, lethal. And then, the doors opened. Gasps rippled through the room. Claire Montgomery walked in. She moved with calm, deliberate steps, every camera turning toward her, every whisper rising. Veronica froze for half a second, just long enough for her mask to crack. Claire walked straight to the front, stopped a few feet from the podium, and spoke. "Do you know what betrayal feels like, Veronica?" Her voice echoed across the hall. "Do you know what it's like to be fired while pregnant, left with nothing, abandoned by the people who should have protected you?" The crowd went silent. Reporters leaned forward. Claire's voice grew stronger. "You tried to erase me then. And you're trying to erase me now. But here's the truth you don't want them to hear: you don't care about justice. You don't care about truth. You only care about power. And you will destroy anyone who threatens it." Veronica laughed coldly, gripping the microphone. "Touching speech, Claire. But who do you think they'll believe? A disgraced doctor under investigation, or me?" Claire took a deep breath. "They'll believe the evidence." She reached into her bag, and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents, recordings, proof of every forged report, every falsified leak Veronica had orchestrated. Evidence collected in secret, traced back to Veronica herself. Gasps erupted as reporters surged forward, snapping photos, shouting questions. Veronica's smile faltered. For the first time, the Queen was cornered. Claire stepped closer, her voice dropping to a razor-sharp whisper only Veronica could hear. "You thought you destroyed me. But you forgot one thing, Veronica. I rise." Veronica's face went pale. The crowd roared with questions, cameras flashing like wildfire. And in that moment, everyone saw it, the mighty Veronica Kane losing control. But this was only the beginning. Because exposing Veronica came with a price. A dangerous one. And as the press swarmed, as Alexander rushed to Claire's side, as Veronica's mask shattered on live television, a shadow was already moving in the background. Someone Claire never expected. Someone who would change the game again. The press conference was chaos. Veronica Kane, the woman who once seemed untouchable, was cornered, humiliated, and exposed on live television. Cameras captured every flicker of panic in her eyes. Reporters swarmed Claire, their questions rising like thunder. Alexander wrapped a protective arm around her, guiding her through the frenzy. For the first time in years, Claire Montgomery felt the weight lifting. She had done it. She had stood against the monster who haunted her. And she had won. Or so she thought. Because sometimes the sharpest knives aren't held by your enemies. They're held by those you trust. Back at the hospital, Claire was summoned to an emergency board meeting. She walked in expecting questions, maybe even praise for her courage. Instead, the room was ice cold. Faces stiff. Eyes full of suspicion. The chairman cleared his throat. "Dr. Montgomery, troubling evidence has been brought to us. Evidence that suggests you fabricated the very documents you presented this morning." Claire froze. "What? That's impossible. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were doctored files, altered versions of the very proof she had unveiled, now twisted to look like forgery. Her stomach dropped. No, this isn't mine." But the board wasn't convinced. Someone had beaten her at her own game. Later that night, Alexander stormed into her apartment, his face tight with anger. "Claire, what the hell is going on? The board is threatening to suspend you. They think you staged everything to ruin Veronica." "I didn't." Claire's voice cracked. "Alexander, you know me. You know I'd never." But then, his phone buzzed. He read a message. His jaw tightened. He looked at her with something she hadn't seen in years, doubt. And in that silence, Claire's world cracked. Hours later, as Claire sat alone in the dark, the truth emerged. A knock at the door. She opened it, and there stood someone she never expected. Her closest ally. The one person she had trusted with her secrets, her fears, her fragile hope. And with a single look in their eyes, she knew. They had betrayed her. The betrayal wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet. Calculated. Her confidant, the person who had sworn loyalty, had handed Veronica the very ammunition that was now being used against her. Why? Money? Fear? A promise of power? Claire's chest ached, not with rage, but with something far worse, heartbreak. Because betrayal from an enemy wounds the body. But betrayal from a friend, it wounds the soul. And then came the cruelest cut of all. Alexander. The man who once abandoned her. The man she was just beginning to believe in again. He didn't outright accuse her. He didn't storm out. But the way he looked at her, questioning, uncertain, was enough to shatter her. It was as if the past had come full circle. Once again, she stood alone. But this time, Claire Montgomery wasn't the same broken woman who once wept in the shadows. No. This time, she was steel. And though betrayal had cut her deeper than ever before, she made a vow in that moment. She would not bow. She would not break. And when the truth finally came out, the world would see, not just who betrayed her, but the true monster hiding in plain sight. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the people you trust. Claire Montgomery knew this truth all too well. She had endured Alexander's abandonment. She had survived Veronica Cain's cruelty. But nothing compared to the sting of discovering that the one person she thought was loyal had turned against her. Her ally. Her confidant. The one she had trusted with her scars, with her secrets. She confronted them. Her voice trembling not with fear, but with fury. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this to me? After everything we've been through, after everything I've shared with you, why betray me now?" They didn't answer at first. They just stared back at her, their silence heavier than any words. And then, they spoke. And the truth was worse than anything she could have imagined. "It wasn't about you, Claire," they said softly. "It was never about you. It was about survival." Her chest tightened. "Survival? What are you talking about?" And then it spilled out, the hidden motive, the buried truth. They weren't working for Veronica out of loyalty. They were working for her, because they were trapped. Veronica Kane had something on them. A secret. A weakness. A sin from their past so dangerous that if revealed, it would destroy their life forever. And Veronica, ruthless as always, had used it like a leash. Claire staggered back as the pieces clicked into place. The leaks. The forged documents. The perfectly timed betrayals. It wasn't just ambition. It wasn't just greed. It was desperation. They had betrayed her, because Veronica had left them no choice. But knowing the motive didn't make it hurt less. In fact, it cut even deeper. Because Claire realized something terrifying. If Veronica could control someone this close to her, someone she trusted with her very soul, then who else was under her thumb? How far did Veronica's reach truly go? And if her empire was built not on wealth, but on blackmail and secrets, how many lives had she already destroyed? Her ally's voice cracked. "I didn't want to do it, Claire. You have to believe me. But she left me no choice. It was you, or me." Claire's eyes burned with tears. "And you chose me. You chose to sacrifice me." The silence between them was unbearable. Because in that silence, Claire understood one devastating truth: in Veronica's world, trust was a luxury no one could afford. But instead of breaking, Claire felt something else rising within her. Resolve. "This ends now," she whispered. Veronica's power, her lies, her empire of blackmail. "I will bring it all crashing down." Her allies shook their head desperately. "You don't understand, Claire. You can't beat her. She has files on everyone, judges, doctors, CEOs, politicians. If you try to fight her, she'll bury you alive." Claire leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Then let her try. Because the difference between Veronica and me is that I have nothing left to lose." The room went silent. But deep inside, Claire knew the truth: Veronica Kane's empire wasn't just built on money. It was built on fear. And fear only worked until someone refused to bow to it. Claire Montgomery had bowed once before. She would never bow again. Power doesn't just sit on the surface. It hides in shadows. It whispers in locked rooms. It thrives in secrets. And Veronica Kane had built her empire entirely on them. Claire Montgomery knew this now. Every betrayal. Every collapse. Every ruined career. It all traced back to one thing: Veronica's secret files. Hidden dossiers. Scandals carefully recorded. Sins waiting to be exposed. This was her fortress. Not her boardrooms. Not her billions. Her secrets. And if Claire wanted to bring her down, she would have to step inside that fortress. It started with research. Long nights, dim screens glowing against tired eyes. Claire pieced together fragments, whispers from colleagues, discrepancies in accounts, faint trails that others ignored. One by one, a picture formed. Veronica's power wasn't limitless, it was organized. She kept everything. Digitized. Coded. Locked in a system so secure it was said no one could breach it. But Claire wasn't no one. She was a cardiologist, trained to find weakness in the most complex system of all, the human heart. And just like the heart, even the strongest system had a vulnerable point. One night, when the city slept, Claire made her move. With trembling hands, she slipped into Veronica's private offices, a place where silence felt alive, walls heavy with the weight of unspoken confessions. The deeper she went, the colder it became. Not just in temperature, but in truth. Because on every shelf, in every drawer, were fragments of lives she could already feel unraveling. And then, she found it. The vault. Not steel. Not concrete. Digital. Hidden behind layers of encryption. But when Claire's fingers touched the keyboard, she felt it, the pulse of something powerful, something monstrous, humming beneath her fingertips. Password screens. Firewalls. Traps. But she pressed on. Every keystroke was a step deeper into Veronica's empire. Every barrier cracked was another secret pulled closer to the light. And then, the files opened. Claire froze. What she saw wasn't just corruption. It was carnage. Judges bought. Doctors silenced. Politicians bribed. CEOs broken. Hundreds of lives. Thousands of careers. All dangling from Veronica's invisible strings. And worse. Claire found familiar names. Names she trusted. Names she loved. Alexander. Her breath caught. There it was, his file. A man she thought she was beginning to understand, beginning to forgive. And yet, Veronica had something on him too. Something Claire didn't know. Something dangerous enough that he had been trapped, just like everyone else. Her heart thundered. Part of her wanted to shut the computer, to unsee it, to run away. But another part, stronger, fiercer, told her no. She had come this far. And she would not leave until she knew the full truth. Line by line, she read. File by file, she uncovered. And with each secret she unearthed, Veronica's empire became more fragile. Because Claire realized something Veronica never expected. Secrets are only powerful as long as they stay hidden. But as the screen flickered with names and crimes, Claire didn't notice the tiny red light above her. A camera. Watching her. Recording her every move. And far away, Veronica Kane was watching too. Claire thought she was dismantling the empire of secrets. But in truth, she had just stepped into its heart. And Veronica was waiting. Every victory comes with a price. And as Claire Montgomery stared at Veronica Cain's files, she believed she had finally seized control of the game. The secrets were hers. The proof was hers. For the first time, Veronica's empire looked fragile. But power never surrenders without a fight. And Veronica Cain was already moving her pieces. The very moment Claire breached the vault, a signal pulsed across encrypted lines. Silent. Invisible. But deadly. Somewhere in the shadows of the city, Veronica's private alert system came alive. Screens lit up. Cameras fed in real time. And there she was, Claire Montgomery, illuminated by the cold glow of stolen secrets. Veronica leaned back in her chair, lips curling into a smile that was equal parts admiration and contempt. So, she whispered to the empty room, "The little doctor thinks she can play queen." Claire had no idea she was being watched. Her hands shook as she scrolled faster. Every revelation made her pulse pound harder. Names. Evidence. Proof strong enough to destroy Veronica's empire overnight. But then, the screen glitched. Just once. A flicker. So fast that most would dismiss it. But Claire knew systems. She had studied the patterns. This was no accident. Someone was watching. Her chest tightened. She wasn't the hunter. She was the prey. And she was already inside the trap. Suddenly, the files began to shift. Words dissolved. Screens blackened. Then new text appeared, not from the archives. From Veronica herself. In blood-red letters across the monitor. "Hello, Claire. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Claire's breath caught. The room felt colder, the silence heavier. Her hands hovered over the keys, but she froze. Veronica was here. Not in body, but in control. "Clever girl," the message continued. "I almost admire you. Almost. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. Especially for someone who has so much to lose." Claire's jaw tightened. She typed back, fingers furious. "You can't stop me. I have everything I need to expose you." For a moment, the screen stayed blank. Then the reply appeared. "No, Claire. You have nothing. Because while you were busy looking at me, I was looking at you." The files changed again. Her stomach dropped. This time, it wasn't Veronica's secrets. It was hers. Personal. Intimate. Photos from her past. Records of her child. Details she thought long buried. Even Alexander's medical file, the one she swore she would protect. All of it, now flashing across the screen. Veronica hadn't just set a trap. She had stripped Claire bare. And then came the final blow. A video file opened automatically. Claire's heart lurched as she saw herself, entering Veronica's office earlier that night. Every step recorded. Every keystroke documented. Proof, undeniable proof, that she had broken into private property, tampered with files, and committed crimes that could ruin her career forever. And Veronica's voice, cool and mocking, played over the feed. "Do you see now, Claire? You're not my enemy. You're my puppet. And I pull the strings." Claire's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to scream, to smash the computer. But it was useless. Veronica owned her now. One wrong move, and everything, her license, her reputation, her future, would be destroyed. And worst of all, Alexander's files still haunted her. Because whatever secret Veronica held over him, it was enough to keep him chained as well. Claire shut her eyes, trying to steady her breath. She had entered this game thinking she could outwit a queen. But now, she realized the truth. Veronica hadn't built an empire of secrets. She had built a cage. And Claire had walked straight into it. The trap had closed. Claire Montgomery stood frozen before the screen, Veronica Kane's words burning into her mind. "You're not my enemy, Claire. You're my puppet. And I pull the strings." Those words echoed in the silence. Cold. Ruthless. Crushing. For a moment, Claire almost believed them. Almost. But then, something changed. A memory. A flicker of her past. The night she was fired. Pregnant. Alone. The night Alexander Steele cast her aside like she was nothing. The night she swore she would never be weak again. That vow still lived inside her. And no matter how powerful Veronica Kane believed she was, Claire Montgomery would not bow. Her fingers trembled, but she forced them back to the keys. Veronica thought she controlled everything, the files, the leverage, the truth. But every empire has cracks. And Claire had spent years in medicine, where life itself hangs by the thinnest of threads. She knew better than anyone that even the strongest systems could fail. She whispered to herself, "If I can rebuild a heart, I can break her chains." Instead of logging out, instead of running, Claire leaned into the trap. She traced the source code behind the flashing words. Lines of Veronica's programming. Encrypted commands. It was brilliant. Ruthless. Unyielding. But Claire had learned something Veronica didn't expect. Not from textbooks. Not from hacking manuals. She learned it from surgery. The steady patience of threading wires into a failing heart. The precision of finding weakness where no one else could see. And there, hidden in the code, she saw it. A fracture. A line Veronica never meant to leave exposed. A door. Small. Fragile. Dangerous. But a door, nonetheless. Her heart pounded. If she pushed, she could force her way into Veronica's private system. But if she failed, she wouldn't just lose. She'd destroy everything. Her career. Her freedom. Alexander's last chance. It was a gamble of life and death. And Claire had no choice. She took a deep breath. One keystroke. Then another. Slow. Careful. Precise. Veronica's program resisted. Warnings flashed. Alarms blared. But Claire didn't stop. This wasn't just hacking. This was surgery. She was cutting into the system's heart, repairing, rerouting, reshaping. Sweat trickled down her temple, but her eyes never blinked. Until finally, the screen shifted. The red words disappeared. And in their place, a vault unlocked. A hidden archive Veronica had never meant her to see. Claire's breath caught. It wasn't just financial records. It wasn't just blackmail. It was everything. Files on politicians, judges, CEOs. And there, buried deep, a personal dossier on Alexander Steele. Her hands shook as she opened it. And what she found was not what she expected. Not greed. Not corruption. Not arrogance. But pain. A medical secret. One Veronica had weaponized against him. Alexander's heart condition was worse than anyone knew. And if it became public, his empire would collapse. He wasn't just her patient. He was a man standing at the edge of death, fighting every day to stay alive. Claire sat back, trembling. For years she had hated him. For years she wanted him to suffer. But this truth, this vulnerability, it reminded her of something dangerous. The man she once loved. The man who had broken her. The man who now lay helpless, his fate bound to hers. She whispered to herself, "This is the chain. This is how Veronica holds him." If she exposed the file, Alexander's world would shatter. If she hid it, Veronica would keep her leash. But if she could find another way, she could break them both free. Claire closed the laptop, her jaw set. The trap had been real. But now, she had the key. And for the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting back. The hospital room was quiet. Machines hummed in steady rhythm, each beep echoing like a ticking clock counting down Alexander Steele's remaining moments. Claire Montgomery stood at his side, her hands clenched, her heart torn between rage and compassion. She knew his secret now. The condition. The weakness he had hidden from the world. The truth that gave Veronica Kane her leash around his throat. But Alexander didn't know she knew. Not yet. And tonight, he would finally speak it aloud. For hours, he had avoided her eyes. For hours, he sat in silence, his pride battling against his fear. But when the room darkened and the city lights flickered through the window, Alexander finally spoke. His voice was low. Broken. "Claire, there's something I should have told you years ago." She turned to him slowly, her face unreadable. He swallowed hard, his hand trembling against the edge of the bed. "I wasn't just cruel back then. I wasn't just arrogant. I was afraid. Terrified." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Afraid of what? Losing me?" He shook his head. "Afraid of myself." His gaze finally met hers. "I've been sick, Claire. For longer than you know. A heart condition. Progressive. Dangerous. The doctors told me I could run out of time before I even turned 40. The words hung heavy in the air. Claire's chest tightened. This was no boardroom excuse. No billionaire arrogance. This was raw truth. Alexander Steele, the man who once seemed invincible, was admitting his greatest weakness. He looked away, his voice trembling now. When you told me you were pregnant, I wanted to be happy. I wanted to give you the world. But all I could think was. His throat tightened. What if I'm not here? What if I don't live long enough to see our child grow? What if I leave you with nothing but pain? Claire's breath caught. Tears threatened, but she forced them back. Is that why you fired me? She whispered. He nodded slowly, shame carving lines into his face. I thought I was protecting you. That if I pushed you away, you wouldn't have to carry the burden of loving a dying man. The room fell silent again. Claire's heart thundered. For years, she thought he abandoned her for greed. For pride. For cruelty. But now, the truth was more complicated. He had abandoned her out of fear. Fear of death. Fear of love. Fear of leaving her broken. And in his twisted way, he thought pushing her away would save her. She clenched her fists. Part of her wanted to scream. To rage. To tell him that his so-called protection had destroyed her. That his choice had left her bleeding and alone. But another part of her ached. Because she saw him not as the untouchable billionaire, not as the man who betrayed her, but as a human being, fragile, terrified, clinging to control he never truly had. Alexander's voice cracked. Claire. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't even deserve your presence here. But if I die tomorrow, I can't let it be without telling you the truth. I loved you. I always did. And every day since, I've regretted the way I let you go. His hand reached out, trembling, searching for hers. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her body rigid. Her heart torn. Then, slowly, she let her fingers brush his. Not forgiveness. Not love reborn. But connection. The first fragile thread between two souls who had been torn apart. Claire's voice was soft, but firm. You think this is the end. But it doesn't have to be. Her eyes locked on his. I won't let Veronica use your weakness against you. I won't let her destroy what little time you have left. If you want to fight, then we fight. Together. Alexander's lips parted, his eyes wide with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. But hope is dangerous. Because the moment Claire and Alexander stood together, the war truly began. Veronica Kane would not surrender. And in the shadows, her empire was already preparing to strike back. This was the heart's confession. But the war of shadows is about to begin. The air outside Alexander's hospital room was heavy. The kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Claire knew the silence wouldn't last. Veronica Kane was too powerful, too ruthless, too venomous to let Alexander's secret stay buried. And now, with Claire by his side, Veronica would see not just weakness. She would see defiance. And she would strike. Across the city, in the glass tower of Steel International, Veronica Kane sat in her office. The woman was elegance wrapped in poison, her red lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. A dossier lay on her desk. Photos. Documents. Medical records. Alexander Steele's heart condition. His greatest vulnerability. Veronica traced her manicured nail across the papers as if caressing the pulse of a man she planned to crush. Her voice, smooth and venomous, slipped into the phone. Pull the investors. Leak the rumors. And when the stock price falls, we move in for the kill. A shadowy voice on the other end replied, "And the doctor?" Veronica's smile widened. "Claire Montgomery. She's a liability. Eliminate her credibility. If that fails, eliminate her." Back at the hospital, Claire felt the walls closing in. Already, whispers moved through the corridors. Reporters lurked outside. Board members called in at odd hours. The news was spreading faster than wildfire. Alexander Steele is dying. A headline that could end an empire overnight. Alexander sat upright in his hospital bed, his strength flickering like a candle. But his eyes, sharp, fierce, burned with determination. "Claire, this is it. She'll try to destroy everything. The company. My name. You." He clenched his fist. "We can't wait for her attack. We strike first." Claire's heart raced. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for redemption. For the empire he built. For the woman he lost. And maybe, just maybe, for the child they never had. For the next 48 hours, the hospital room transformed into a war room. Files. Financial reports. Security footage. Names of allies who could be trusted, and enemies who could not. Claire worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragments of Veronica's schemes. Alexander, despite his failing heart, barked strategies with the precision of a general. The man who once abandoned love was now ready to sacrifice everything for it. But Veronica Kane was always one step ahead. At midnight, the first strike came. A breaking news alert flashed across every screen. Alexander Steele's empire crumbles, CEO unfit, medical crisis concealed, board prepares emergency vote. The world gasped. Investors panicked. Stocks plummeted. And just like that, Veronica's shadow spread across the empire like wildfire. Claire slammed the laptop shut, fury burning in her veins. "They won't stop until you're ruined. Until you're gone." Alexander looked at her, his face pale but resolute. "Then we don't play defense anymore. We take the fight to her." Claire's eyes narrowed. "For that, we'll need evidence. Proof of her corruption. Proof strong enough to bring her down." Alexander leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "And I know exactly where to find it." The hospital lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the city, Veronica Kane smiled. Because the war of shadows had begun. And in wars like this, only one side survives. This was War of Shadows. And the final battle was only just beginning. The night was long, but neither Claire nor Alexander slept. In the dim glow of the hospital monitors, the two of them sat like conspirators in exile, a fallen king and the woman fate had chosen to hold his life in her hands. Every beat of his faltering heart was a reminder, time was running out. But Claire saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. Not arrogance. Not cruelty. Not the cold, untouchable billionaire. But fire. The kind of fire that comes when a man has nothing left to lose, except the woman he once destroyed. Claire, Alexander's voice was hoarse, breaking the silence. There's something you don't know. Veronica wasn't just my partner in business, she was my enemy long before she became yours. Claire's brows knit in confusion. What do you mean? He exhaled, his chest rising and falling with effort. She wasn't after me. She was after us. From the very beginning, Veronica hated the idea of me being with you. She saw you as weakness. Vulnerability. And when she learned you were pregnant. Alexander's voice faltered. Claire's breath caught. What? She whispered. She gave me a choice, he said, his tone filled with shame. End things with you, or lose everything. The board. The company. My empire. Claire's hands trembled. So you chose them over me. Silence. A silence that weighed more than 1,000 apologies. Tears welled in Claire's eyes, but behind them was fire. You let her dictate my life. You let her decide whether our child would grow up with a father. You betrayed us for an empire that's crumbling beneath you. Her voice cracked like glass. Alexander bowed his head. And I would give all of it up right now, if it meant I could undo that choice. Claire's heart warred with itself. Hate. Love. Revenge. Regret. She wanted to scream, to walk away, to let Veronica finish him off. But something inside her refused. Not because she forgave him. Not because the pain had disappeared. But because deep down, she knew that if Veronica Kane won, it would mean their story ended in her shadow. And Claire Montgomery refused to let anyone write her ending. Then we bring her down, Claire said coldly. Alexander's eyes widened. You'd help me? After everything? Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't for you. This is for me. For the child I lost. For every night I cried alone while you lived like a king. This is for every woman who was told she was disposable. If I'm going to save you, then I'm going to make sure it costs her everything. Alexander reached for the drawer beside his bed. His hand trembled as he pulled out a small, encrypted drive. This, he said, placing it in her palm, is the proof. Years of her bribes, her shell companies, her offshore accounts. Enough to ruin her forever. Claire stared at it. The weight of the war now resting in her hand. But before she could speak, the hospital lights flickered again. A shadow passed across the doorway. And a man in a black suit lingered in the hall, his eyes cold, unblinking. Claire's blood ran cold. Veronica Kane had made her move. And now, there was no turning back. Because the war wasn't about to start. It had already begun. This was the last betrayal. And the final strike was closer than either of them realized. The hospital was never truly silent. There were always the beeps of machines, the distant shuffle of nurses' shoes, the faint hum of fluorescent lights. But tonight, the silence was different. It wasn't calm. It was dangerous. Claire felt it first, a chill that crawled across her skin, a sense that the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then she saw him. A man in a black suit, standing at the far end of the corridor. Too still. Too deliberate. And when his gaze locked with hers, she knew, he wasn't here for a patient. He was here for Alexander. Claire's pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect herself. But she didn't move. She couldn't. Because behind her lay Alexander, the man who had broken her heart, yes, but also the man whose heartbeat now depended on her. Her jaw tightened. Not tonight, Veronica. Not like this. She stepped into the hallway, her voice cold, steady. Visiting hours are over. The man didn't answer. He just started walking, slow, deliberate steps that echoed like a countdown. Claire's hand tightened around the encrypted drive in her pocket. If he got past her, if Alexander died tonight, that proof would die with him. And then Veronica Kane would win. The man's hand slipped into his jacket. A flash of metal. Claire's breath caught. Gun. Without thinking, she lunged at the nearest crash cart, sending it rolling into the hall with a loud clatter. The distraction bought her seconds. Only seconds. The man cursed, pulling the weapon free, but in that moment, alarms blared. Nurses rushed into the corridor, startled by the commotion. The assassin vanished into the chaos, swallowed by the crowd. Claire stood frozen, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. She had faced death before, in operating rooms, in emergency surgeries, in moments where seconds meant life or loss. But this was different. This wasn't fate. This wasn't biology. This was war. And Veronica Kane had just fired her first shot. When Claire returned to the room, Alexander's face was pale. "I saw him," he rasped. "She's not waiting for the boardroom anymore. She wants me gone before I can fight back." Claire placed the encrypted drive on the tray beside him. "Then we don't wait either. You have proof. I have skills. Together, we can finish this." Alexander's eyes searched hers, filled with something she hadn't seen in years, trust. "Claire, if we do this, there's no going back." Her answer was ice-sharp. "There was no going back the moment you fired me." But even as they plotted, Claire couldn't shake the image of the man in the black suit. The way he moved. The way he disappeared. This wasn't just one assassin. This was an army. And she knew, no matter how powerful Alexander once was, no matter how much proof they held in their hands, Veronica Kane had the kind of power that didn't crumble overnight. The empire was beginning to crack. But a crumbling empire is the most dangerous kind. Because it will destroy anything in its path before it falls. And Claire Montgomery was standing directly in the fire. This was only the beginning. The encrypted drive was more than just files. It was a doorway into secrets Alexander had buried for years, secrets he had feared more than bankruptcy, more than scandal, more than death itself. But Claire, she wasn't afraid anymore. Fear had been burned out of her long ago, replaced by something sharper. Determination. Late that night, when Alexander finally drifted into restless sleep, Claire sat at the dim glow of a hospital monitor, the drive plugged in. Page after page of documents unfolded before her. Financial records. Offshore accounts. Bribes. Blackmail photos. But then, one file caught her breath. Labeled, Kane/Bloodline. Inside was a birth certificate. Dated decades ago. Claire frowned, reading the names. Veronica Kane, daughter of. Her heart stopped. No, she whispered. It wasn't possible. But it was right there in black and white. Veronica Kane was not just a rival. Not just a vulture circling Alexander's empire. She was blood. Alexander's half-sister. Claire staggered back from the screen, her mind reeling. That was why Veronica's hatred burned so cold, why she moved with such precision, why she seemed to know every weakness, every shadow of Alexander's life. She wasn't just trying to take him down. She was trying to erase him, to claim everything for herself, because in her twisted mind, it was hers by birthright. When Alexander awoke, Claire was waiting, the drive still in her hands. "Tell me the truth," she demanded, her voice trembling. "Who is she to you?" Alexander's eyes flickered with pain, a pain he had carried alone for too long. "She's my father's daughter. A secret he never wanted the world to know. I found out after he died. I tried to keep it buried, to protect the company, to protect myself." His voice cracked. But she didn't want money. She didn't want peace. She wanted revenge. For being hidden. For being denied. Claire's hands shook as she slammed the drive onto the tray. "All this time, you let me believe she was just another rival. You never told me the truth. You put me, and everyone else, in the line of fire, because you were too ashamed to admit your family's sins." Alexander's face crumpled. "You don't understand, if the world knew." Claire cut him off, her voice sharp as glass. "I understand perfectly. Veronica doesn't just want to destroy you. She wants to destroy anyone who stands beside you. And that includes me." She turned away, her reflection trembling in the hospital window. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It wasn't just about power or empire. It was blood. It was family. And Claire Montgomery, the woman who had once been discarded, who had built her life from ashes, now found herself standing in the middle of a war that was older, darker, and more personal than she ever imagined. She whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "If she's blood, then this won't end in a courtroom. It won't end in the boardroom. It will end in blood." And in that moment, Claire knew. The final battle wasn't just about saving Alexander's life. It was about rewriting the legacy of an empire poisoned by secrets. And the price would be everything. Because when family turns to war, there are no survivors. The truth had a way of burning through lies like fire through dry wood. And now, the fire was spreading. Claire and Alexander sat in silence, the glow of the encrypted files still flickering on the screen. Between them lay more than proof, more than strategy. between them lay a truth so raw it threatened to destroy everything. Veronica Kane wasn't just a rival. She was blood. And blood feuds never ended quietly. Alexander broke the silence first, his voice hoarse. "She won't stop, Claire. Not until I'm dead. Not until the company's hers." Claire's eyes were steel. "Then we don't wait for her next move. We take the fight to her." For the first time in years, Alexander saw it, not just the woman he had once loved, not just the girl he had betrayed. He saw the warrior she had become. A woman forged in heartbreak. Sharpened by pain. Unstoppable. Together, they began to prepare. Alexander reached out to the few board members still loyal, pulling strings, whispering warnings, planting seeds of doubt in Veronica's carefully crafted empire. Claire gathered medical evidence, proof of Alexander's fragile condition, proof of how Veronica had manipulated his treatment, staged accidents, even attempted murder within the hospital itself. Piece by piece, they built their arsenal. But both knew, evidence alone wouldn't end this. Veronica Kane thrived in the shadows, where secrets screamed louder than facts. To destroy her, they would have to drag her into the light. Late that night, Alexander's voice broke the silence. "Claire, after everything I did to you, after firing you, abandoning you, leaving you to suffer alone, why are you helping me now?" Claire's jaw tightened. "I'm not doing this for you, Alexander. I'm doing this because people like her don't stop. Because if she wins, she'll destroy more than you. She'll destroy everyone in her path." But deep inside, her heart whispered a truth she wasn't ready to face. A truth she buried beneath anger and resolve. That part of her still cared. The next day, the hospital shook with chaos. Alexander's private wing was stormed by Veronica's legal team, flanked by media cameras. A press conference, live, broadcast worldwide. Veronica stood at the podium, every inch the flawless predator, dripping with charm and poison. "Today," she declared, "we reveal the truth. Alexander Steele, my so-called half-brother, is unfit to lead. His empire is crumbling. His mind, failing. His heart, weak. For too long, he has lied to shareholders, employees, and the public. But no more. From this day forward, the Steele legacy belongs to its rightful heir." The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. And for the first time, Alexander looked broken. But then, Claire stepped forward. Straight into the cameras. Straight into the storm. "Lies," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. All eyes turned. Veronica's smile faltered. Claire held up the encrypted drive. "This is the truth. Proof of every crime you've committed. Every bribe, every blackmail, every staged attack. You call yourself the rightful heir? No. You're nothing but a thief in designer clothes." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Veronica's eyes narrowed. Her mask slipped. "You think anyone will believe a discarded mistress with a vendetta?" she hissed. Claire didn't flinch. "I'm not his mistress. I'm his doctor. His cardiologist. And I'm the only reason he's alive to expose you." The tension cracked like lightning. This wasn't just a press conference anymore. This was war, played out live, for the world to see. And Claire knew, there was no turning back now. Because the reckoning had begun. And only one Kane would walk away with the empire. The press conference had ended in chaos. Board members shouting. Cameras flashing. Reporters screaming questions that clawed at the air like vultures. But one truth had broken through the noise, piercing Veronica Kane's carefully woven facade. Her empire was no longer untouchable. By dawn, headlines tore across the globe. Steel Empire scandal, hidden crimes exposed. Veronica Kane under fire, fraud allegations surface. From heiress to villain? Investors panicked. Shares plummeted. Lawsuits piled like storm clouds. For years, Veronica Kane had moved like a queen on a chessboard, untouchable, flawless, always 10 steps ahead. But now, the world was watching. And queens don't survive when the board itself turns against them. But Veronica was not the kind to surrender. No. Cornered, she became something else. Something feral. In her penthouse, walls lined with shattered glass from her own fury, she screamed into her phone. Fix it. Silence the press. By the judges. Make them disappear. But her empire was fracturing. Her allies turned distant. Her investors fled. And for the first time, Veronica Kane felt what it meant to bleed. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Alexander stood taller than he had in months. His voice steadied, his eyes sharper. Claire, he said, gripping her hand, we've shaken her empire. But she won't go quietly. She'll strike back, harder than ever. Claire's reply was fire. Then let her come. I've survived worse than her. And now, she's the one on borrowed time. Together, they prepared. Files were sent to law enforcement. Evidence leaked to journalists. Hidden accounts exposed. Step by step, they dismantled Veronica Kane's empire. But desperation breeds madness. One night, as the hospital lay wrapped in uneasy silence, Claire caught sight of movement in the shadows. An elevator. Unmarked boxes. Strangers in suits. And then she realized. This wasn't an attack on Alexander anymore. This was scorched earth. Veronica had sent men to erase everything, the drives, the files, even the hospital records. If she couldn't win, she would burn it all. Claire didn't hesitate. She moved with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a storm. Alarms blared. Security clashed with Veronica's men in the corridors. Papers scattered, flames flickered. And in the center of the chaos stood Claire Montgomery, the woman who had once been broken, abandoned, forgotten. Not anymore. Tonight, she was the shield. The blade. The reckoning. And as she stared down the last of Veronica's hired shadows, her voice rang clear. Tell your mistress, her empire just fell. But even as Claire stood victorious in the chaos, she knew. Veronica Kane was not finished. No. The woman who had built her life on secrets would not die quietly. Somewhere out there, in the ashes of her crumbling empire, Veronica was waiting. And her next move would be deadly. Because the fall of an empire is never the end. It's only the beginning of vengeance. The city had gone quiet. But quiet was never safety. Quiet was the pause before a storm. And for Claire Montgomery, silence had become the most dangerous sound of all. For weeks, Veronica Kane had vanished. No sightings. No public statements. No movement in her companies. It was as if the Queen had left the board. But Claire knew better. Veronica Kane didn't vanish. She waited. She watched. She plotted. And when she returned, it would be to kill. Inside the hospital, life was fragile but brighter. Alexander Steele, once broken and consumed by guilt, was healing. Slowly. His hand was steadier. His voice clearer. His laugh, real. And in those stolen moments with Claire, it felt as if they had finally stolen back something from fate itself. But happiness is fragile. And fate is cruel. Because in the very hour Claire thought they were safe, Veronica Kane struck her final blow. It didn't begin with fire. Or knives. Or men in shadows. It began with betrayal. One of the hospital board members, a man Claire had trusted, signed a deal behind closed doors. Funding cut. Patients moved. Security withdrawn. And in the hollow silence of those decisions, doors opened. Doors Veronica Kane had paid for. Claire felt it first. A chill in the corridor. The wrong footsteps echoing in the night. The way Alexander's room, once guarded, now seemed exposed. And then a shadow moved. It happened fast. Too fast. Masked men stormed the ward. Nurses screamed. Files were ripped apart. And in the chaos, Claire was dragged to the floor, a gun pressed to her temple. "Veronica sends her regards," the man hissed. And then, like a phantom stepping from the smoke, Veronica Kane appeared. Her hair disheveled, her eyes hollow with rage and desperation. But her voice was still venom. Well, well. The good doctor. The saint. The woman who thinks she can steal what's mine. She walked closer, every step deliberate, every word dripping with malice. "You should have learned, Claire. No one crosses Veronica Kane and lives." Claire rose to her knees, refusing to cower. Her eyes locked on Veronica's. "You've already lost. The world knows who you are. Your empire is ashes. And soon, you'll be nothing but a name in a courtroom." For a moment, just a moment, Veronica's mask cracked. Rage burned through her composure. Then she pulled the trigger. The shot rang out. But not at Claire. Alexander had moved. With a strength that defied his healing body, he threw himself between them. The bullet tore through silence. Through flesh. Through fate. And Alexander Steele fell. Time froze. The world went still. Claire's scream shattered the air. Veronica's eyes widened, for the first time tasting the bitterness of consequences. And in that silence, The empire she had killed to protect finally turned on her. Because sirens wailed in the distance. Police stormed the building. Her men fled. And Veronica Kane, the untouchable queen, was dragged to the floor in chains. But the victory was hollow. Because as Veronica was pulled away screaming, Claire dropped to Alexander's side. His eyes were fading, his breath shallow, his blood staining her hands. And in that moment, Claire Montgomery realized. The last betrayal wasn't Veronica Kane's. It was fate's. And fate had always been cruel. The operating room was drenched in light. Cold. Blinding. Unforgiving. Claire Montgomery stood at the center of it all, her hands trembling but steadying themselves with sheer will. On the table before her, Alexander Steele. His chest open. His life spilling away second by second. The man who had once destroyed her, now depending on her for survival. And this time, there were no second chances. Outside, the world still shook from Veronica Kane's downfall. News stations screamed her name, the once untouchable queen of power dragged through courtrooms in chains. But inside this room, none of that mattered. What mattered was the rhythm of a failing heart. The faint flicker of a man caught between life and death. And the woman who had sworn never to let him break her again. For a fleeting moment, Claire's hand hovered above the scalpel. A question burned in her chest. Why save him? Why save the man who had betrayed her, abandoned her, left her to suffer alone? Revenge whispered, let him go. End it here. Let fate take what you never could. But another voice, softer, deeper, the one she had buried for years, spoke louder. Because once, you loved him. Because once, he was more than power, more than betrayal. Because even broken, love leaves a scar, and hers had never fully healed. With tears burning behind her eyes, Claire silenced the storm inside her. And she began to work. Every incision, every stitch, every desperate move was a war against fate itself. Her gloves turned crimson. Her voice broke as she shouted orders. Her hands moved with a surgeon's discipline, but her heart beat like a lover's. And in that moment, Claire Montgomery stopped being just his doctor. She became his salvation. Minutes bled into hours. Machines screamed. Flatlines threatened. And just when hope seemed lost, a rhythm returned. A fragile heartbeat. A spark of life refusing to die. Claire dropped her head, her body shaking. She had done it. She had brought Alexander Steele back from the edge of death. Days passed. Alexander awoke, weaker than ever, but alive. His first sight was Claire, exhausted, her eyes red, but there. Still there. And for the first time in his life, the billionaire who thought he could buy the world whispered words that had never crossed his lips before. Thank you, for saving me. Even when I didn't deserve it. Claire didn't answer. She couldn't. Because forgiveness wasn't simple. Love wasn't simple. And the wounds he had left on her life would never fully heal. But in that silence, in the way she stayed by his side instead of walking away, there was an answer. A beginning. Or an ending. Perhaps both. Meanwhile, Veronica Cain's empire burned. Her trial became the spectacle of the century. Every crime unearthed. Every betrayal exposed. She fought. She schemed. She raged. But in the end, even her billions could not buy freedom. The Queen of Shadows was sentenced. Her reign was finished. And the world turned its eyes away, leaving her to rot in the very darkness she once controlled. And so, the story came full circle. A woman once broken, discarded, left with nothing, had risen. Not through revenge. Not through destruction. But through resilience. Through strength. Through the courage to heal, even when healing felt impossible. Claire Montgomery was no longer the girl who had been fired while pregnant by a billionaire CEO. She was a doctor. A survivor. A woman who held the power to save, and the power to choose. And in that choice, she had claimed something Veronica Cain never could. Redemption. This is where the story ends. Not with bullets. Not with betrayals. But with the steady beat of a heart that refused to stop. And if this story touched you, a reminder that love and hate, vengeance and forgiveness, power and weakness, all of it lives in the fragile rhythm of a single heartbeat. Share it. Comment your thoughts. Subscribe for more stories that move the heart and stir the soul. And sometimes, just sometimes, that heartbeat is enough to change everything.